Hello, Internet. Welcome to my wrap up for where I'm at with Spider Books currently. If you saw my last video, you'll know I'm not excited with where things are at now. For those playing the home game, I just read ASM 23 and 24, so I don't know what happened in 25, but I'm not even sure it matters at this point. Um, they screwed the pooch. Peter's not acting like Peter. We still don't really know who Paul is. The kids are being used as a duty, they're not characters on their own. We're dealing with Peter teaming up with Norman Osborn, and we haven't been given a good reason as to why, especially given all the history there. It just doesn't work, even going back and seeing it. Um, and as many people have pointed out online, I'm less worried about it. There's just a million continuity errors, especially when you start bringing in like where the Fantastic Four were at the time and what Peter was supposed to have been doing, and little like instances about it just doesn't work. Um, I don't know. It's a poorly told story. Editorial clearly needed to step in. What kills me is I know Zeb Wells is a better writer than this. I've read a good chunk of his work. He's capable of doing better regularly. Something is amiss at the Spider. Like, it's just hard to ignore at this point. There's so many things that go sour, and it's not based on the individual comics or the individual stories. It's these overall directions. And I know it's easy to point the finger at editorial, but when it starts being years and years and creators after creators, and it's the same problem every time, at a certain point, it's easy to point the finger because you know where the problem is. Nick Lowe needs to go. It's not working. These are creating story problems that creative writing 101 would solve. They're not doing their job as storytellers. All right, moving on. Mary Jane and Black Cat has been kind of a fun romp. Um, I I do try to take books on their own merit, but it is impossible to separate this from what's going on with Amazing Spider-Man, and it just undercuts kind of the fun stuff of what's been going on. Also, this is a 5 issue mini, could have very easily been four. There's a lot of dead weight, bad stuff, and they're doing some lame jokes about Sim, who, if you're unfamiliar, is a character from Claremont's time on the X books, introduced in the Magic miniseries, and was the torturer of Ileana and played off of the idea of Cerebus and Dave Sim at the time. And now that has a little more weight and makes a little more sense, and maybe Claremont knew something. I don't know. But they're kind of playing around with the idea that he's this fun, pudgy character, and it's this one thing that's come up in almost every issue of this, and it just doesn't land. And it didn't land the first time, and it's like telling that bad joke again and again, like it's going to be funny by repetition. And no, uh, but there is some good humor in here. It is of Jed McKay, so it's kind of the Black Cat line of books, but of them, I'd say this is the worst one. Uh, Again, it's just this like curse that seems to be going. And also, part of all this that's not brought up in the Amazing Spider-Man book almost intentionally is that Mary Jane has this I'm going to say hero watch. Saying that alone doesn't make sense, but in DC there's that series Hero, and people have, it's been different things at different eras, but it's a MacGuffin that grants them a random superpower at a time, and it's been different people or one person taking power. Anyways, Mary Jane has this watch. It grants her a randomized superpower, and uh, Black Cat was affecting that with her bad luck powers, and that's been a thing throughout. Which is interesting, I guess, but also giving Mary Jane superpowers hits on a problem that I've heard a number of people talk about throughout the years, and that is in Marvel and increasingly at DC. they're not allowing characters to be characters. They all have to be superheroes in some way. They all have to be overly enabled. They all have to be part of the mix, and there can't be any quiet time. There can't be any home life, which is bleeding to another constant problem I've been bringing up, which is the stakes have to be so high. This is symptomatic of all of that. We don't have any quieter characters. We don't have any quieter moments. Everything's in limbo or something. It's this big explosion, big fight. We never have time to add meaning. And as this becomes more and more common, it's really hard, as someone who's been a lifelong fan of this, to justify continuing to get, especially so much of it. It's hard to look back at a story that had a little trouble piecing together and reading when I was in elementary school. That's ultimately about Spider Man dealing with rent control and whatnot, and the punks that take advantage of all that. And the story that's played pretty straight. And yeah, there's some Spider Man action thrown in, but it's dealing with a very serious, down to earth problem of the 1980s. And seeing that and getting so much more out of pulling that out of my back issue bin. And then seeing that there's nothing like that now. So much of what I've used to validate and, you know, find interest in and talk about the value of comics and why we need serialized storytelling, why these comics have to be of the now, and that's why you continue to get them, is slowly devolving into representations of all the arguments people used against comics for so many years. Now that they're more widely accepted, it feels kind of crazy, and it's really kind of rough. And I've been having a little mini crisis with that. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, but I'd very much like to hear it. Next up is Red Goblin. I have to be honest, I skimmed this. This is dealing with all the Osborne crap and is leading to Gold Goblin versus Red Goblin, obviously, and I don't care about the Osborns. They want to sell them as these sympathetic people who are trying to make a better life for themselves with this curse over them or whatever. No, they're just bad people. I don't care. Ah. Then next up is I had a bad month for this, where I order. This one was told to me though. I ordered two covers for Spider-Man 7 because I was told this was going to be a collector's item. Dan Slott made a big deal about it on Twitter, and I thought, what's an extra couple bucks if I can flip it for 20 or whatever? I'll see, when I get around to it. Um, yeah, we're winding down this Spider Verse thing that cropped up again, and this is Dan Slott's re entry as a Spider Man writer, and it's been very much something that nobody needs to read. There's nothing new here. There's nothing interesting here. There's nothing. It's hard to follow um, what it's saying about the characters in that new. And the big middle part, I guess, is that Spider-Man went away and that Silk was the main character. But even in the 616, but it doesn't register as that when you have all these multiversal things, then this is a different universe with these characters played a different way. Fine. It would have been better to do, and they have a new role for this, is an extended what if. What if Peter Parker was Silk's guy in the chair, and then we play through with these things? Then we have a clean story. We could have done basically everything Dan Slott wanted to do in the story, except for the side gags of Spider Verse again. And it would have maybe been a compelling, interesting story to view things in a different way. And I know Dan Slott's never said this, but I've listened to a lot of what Dan Slott has to say, and I know one of the main criticisms of his, decade plus run on Amazing was Silk and how that character is treated, and people feel it's fairly sexist, whatnot, and that goes against a big ethos that Dan Slott was trying to hit with when he writes books, is he doesn't want to feel like anybody's targeted, especially by the heroes, in a way that would make them feel bad or slighted or marginalized or anything. Generally a good principle, but I feel like, times change and you can't hit that 100% of the time, but generally a good rule, yes. with Silk making her Peter's fuck buddy right from the get go. I know he's trying to do something. It hit me. I got it, but I'm also not the audience you have to worry about for the other side of that. Um, it dug at him because it was a valid criticism and it went against an ethos that he'd been trying to push against. This story is, I believe, really a recompense for something and is why it was the first story back. Now that I've seen the main thrust, that where we spent really the better part of 3 issues of the 7 part thing, outside of the whole multiversal getting there and wiping it out or whatever. He wanted to tell the story where Silk was enabled completely the hero and gave people that moment with the character to kind of see her in her best light, which is great and all, I guess, but also there's been several Silk ongoing since the story he told and whatnot, and it just feels like it almost would have been better for him to do a Silk mini in this sense as a what if or something. Like I said, they have the new extended what ifs. Zadarsky did that with his symbiote story, and there's the Miles multiverse one, and frankly, the Spider-Man life story was essentially that. This could have been there, would have been stronger for it because it would have been a story told through, and you would have had space for smaller stakes. You would have had space for characters to be human. This with hit on all of the problems that I was talking about with the Mary Jane Black Cat thing. Also, they're introducing the Spider Boy bit, which is supposed to be a. It seems like a more lighter and friendly version of Mix Plick Splick or something, but Spider-Man wise, where he had this sidekick all along and he's gonna interject in these stories. And I just, it doesn't seem like anybody likes this either. And that's hit something that I've talked about in the Spider-Man office in the past. I mean, we had the whole Spence run. Nobody liked where that ended up. We have this current run in Amazing, and no one seems particularly pleased with it. We have this Spider-Man run with Dan Slott coming back, and that was already contentious to begin with because Dan Slott is a controversial figure for whatever the reason, and he's doing these things that are playing off of all of the worst parts of his Amazing run. Um, the Spider Verse thing. I mean, when he did Spider Verse the second time, it received a lot of criticism because it wasn't, there wasn't anything new, there wasn't anything refreshing, there wasn't anything big about it. Um, it wasn't a good read. Even I, the biggest defender of the Spider Verse in the Spider Man circles that I ran in, when it came around again, I was like, I just saw more of all the criticisms, whatever, instead and had to agree with them. Like, there is nothing there. And then the Spider Boy thing is very close echoes to when Dan Slott brought in Alpha for a big Spider-Man milestone number. And he's talked so much about how that story didn't work because it was supposed to be told in one issue and then it got expanded into this thing. And so nobody liked Alpha, but they spend so much time not liking Alpha as a character and then waiting for the next issue, and then they just cement in their mind that they didn't like him, and that was the point, is that the character is supposed to grow, which I've heard Dan Slott talk about this, and he's partially right. I mean, that split wasn't there, whatever, but I mean, even if you told that story in one issue, it wouldn't fix the problem because it was an unlikable snot learning the most basic lesson about responsibility. Yes, does that echo to Spider-Man's origin? Sure, but Peter Parker learned a lesson about responsibility, and if you go back and read those early Ditko issues, he comes off as a bit more of a snot, but he also feels like a more capable character, but he's also played again in the human world. Alpha has so much privilege and so much given to him. I mean, he's this white 8-year old suddenly superhero who gets like sponsorship deals and everything. It's at a level so high. And then he learns that he has to be vaguely responsible. It does not sing. It is not parody to Amazing Fantasy 15 at all. It is just that idea not told as well. And I say this, I like most of Dan Slott's run. That story is not one of the good ones. I, there's plenty in there, but that's not one of the good ones. Um, then we come to Miles Morales, number 5. Um, Again, there's no human characters. Everything's exploding, and we're dealing with, are these characters going to die? It's 5 issues in. We're playing off the Ahmed run, but Ziegler is burning the house down, and there's nothing new being added. He's just burning down the old. Um, it's not fun to read. It's taking a lot of stuff that I thought was cool and was built up over years and just saying no, which Marvel needs to learn. Again, the human characters. Part of what makes Spider-Man such a compelling read is Harry Osborn, Liz Osborn, yeah, Mary Jane, but also Aunt May being part of the Grey Panthers, also one of the few people Aunt May dated, or some of the friends at the side, or the cast of the Daily Bugle, Jay Jonah, um, both the Robinsons, all these characters that existed through multiple creators and was part of the tapestry. With Spider-Man came this side cast. And you're supposed to have that. I like with Deadpool, there was supposed to be a side cast. With Superman, there's supposed to be a side cast. These characters are part of the main character's world. When you lose that, you cut off an aspect of the main character, but you also cut off years of history to draw on. And when you make them a villain of the week for a big reveal, or you just kill them off, you're killing off storytelling potential. There used to be more weight on this. The reason Gwen Stacy dying was such a big deal wasn't just because it hurt Peter Parker. It's because his entire world changed. And frankly, he had to go meet some new characters because suddenly this part wasn't there. And it wasn't just Gwen Stacy, it was the Stacys. There was more than that one bit. Um, they're trying to build up Miles, frankly, for the second time after he came back from the Ultimate World and was put into the 616. They really had to reboot, and all the stuff was built up. And they're just saying, "Oh, this is going to be exciting. We're going to do all this, and where's he going to be? He's going to be a man alone." It's the most boring story Marvel or DC can tell because they've done it with every character at this point, and you cut off everything before it. Why am I supposed to care about the next issue? Oh, does Spider-Man live? Of course he does. But if no one else does, maybe he should kill himself. Maybe he failed that poorly. It's frustrating. So, as I've been rambling throughout, all these books, same editorial office, same overarching what editorial is supposed to be looking at problems. It's the same problem represented book after book after book. I don't know. Curious if you guys have any other thoughts. I plan on doing some other videos soon. I'm going to be breaking these up, seeing if I get a little more traction if I do some different things. Cheers.